It is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Glad to have all you guys back for yet another day. Some glorious sunshine out there. I'm going to get out there and get after it. I think today maybe do a little running, get outside. This is the time we wait for. We think, in my mind, like the good weather starts in March, and that's just like wishful thinking for me. Then April comes, and I'm like, okay, now it's really coming. And then April is, it's okay sometimes, but not always great. This April was not the greatest. But now it's May. We should finally be into pretty much consistently good weather. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, whatever you got to do. So get out there and enjoy it. These are the days we are waiting for and we work for all the winter long. But as usual, we're not here to talk about the weather. Sometimes I fall into that trap. I am a Midwesterner, North Dakota native, Minnesotan for a long time now. I fall into that trap, but we're going to get out of that trap right now because we got a lot to talk about on the show today. Ben Goessling, Vikings writer from the Star Tribune, will join me here in just a little bit to talk about the Vikings, where they stand after the draft, the quarterback question, how Jordan Addison, their new wide receiver, might help their offense. Got into a good discussion about kind of specifics on that I'll write about a little bit later on Tuesday as well. The Za'Darius Smith question, the Dalvin Cook question, just lots of stuff to chew on with this team, even as they kind of enter the less exciting part of their offseason. Some rookie mini camps, some other stuff coming up, but really the big picture offseason stuff will start to unfold once we get to training camp and get a fuller picture of what this roster looks like. Also, Karl-Anthony Towns, Chris Hine took a swing at kind of what a Karl-Anthony Towns trade would look like, why that might be a good idea or why it might not be a good idea. We'll get into that a little bit at the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? Just going to spend a few minutes on the Wild today because they had their exit interviews on Monday. A lot of players talking about the disappointment of how this season finished. A very familiar lament. The Wild has lost 7 straight postseason series. First round exits in all of them, 6 true playoff series, and the one kind of preliminary round in the COVID season. I took a shot on Monday at kind of finding some common threads in all of this, and it was kind of hard because the real common thread is that they've lost, right? In a volatile NHL where lower seeds win all the time, where upsets happen in this league all the time, where Florida just beat one of the greatest regular season teams of all time, Boston, in 7 games, where an 8 seed knocks off a 1 seed a quarter of the time in the first round, where the margins are so slim. The Wild consistently loses in the first round. And why is that? Why has that been over the years? And what I found was there have been some different culprits, right? Like some years it feels like the other team has a clear goaltending edge and exploits that in a series. Sometimes it feels like the Wild comes up short with its own offense. I think that 2017 series against the Blues is a good example of that. Sometimes it's special teams like this year and last year that really tell the story. The constant for me, aside from the fact that they've been bounced now 7 years in a row in the first round, giving up basically an average of a little over 3 goals a game, scoring a little more than 2 goals a game. I mean, that's playoff hockey, right? 3-2 is a very playoff hockey score. The real constant to me, and the only player who really put a finger on it on Monday, at least that I saw, the real constant to me is a lack of killer instinct. And now that was voiced by a few Wild players. I think Ryan Hartman was the one that really had the best kind of finger on that pulse. He said, I don't think we capitalized on our opportunities to extend leads within games he's talking about, to get leads, to extend series leads, Hartman said. There's a lot of opportunities to score the first goal. In a couple games, we could have been up 2-0, 3-0 in the first period, and we failed to do that. Bingo, Ryan Hartman. That was some of what I wrote about on Monday when I was looking for common threads. 5 times now in the last 4 years, the Wild have had a series lead. 2020 in that preliminary round, they won the first game. 2021, they won the first game. 2022, they were up 2-1 in the series. And then this year, they were up 1-0 in the series and 2-1 in the series. In all 5 cases, they lost the very next game. In 4 of those 5 cases, they lost the next 3 games. The only difference being this year when they lost when they were up 1-0, but then won right away to go up 2-1 again, but then got swept out again with the next 3. Same with last year when they went up 2-1, swept in the last 3. 2021, they won the first one, lost the next 3. 2020, won the first one, lost the next three to be out of that series. So whatever that is, if you want to call it a killer instinct, if you want to call it the ability to capitalize on the moment, to ride momentum, maybe that is a common thread. Maybe that's where the team needs to get better. And obviously, the opponent has something to do with that, right? If the opponent's down in the series, that's when desperation kicks in. That's when you have to realize you have to be disciplined. You have to realize you're going to get the other team's best effort. And I don't feel like the Wild have been able to do that in these last 4 years in particular. I don't know if that's teachable. I don't know if that's coachable, but it's recognizable at the very least, and it seems like at least Hartman sees it. Maybe that's something they can carry into the offseason and understand that it's not so much the talent sometimes, it's not so much the effort, it's recognizing the moment, knowing what is going to be coming at you next, and realizing, hey, this is the game where we really got to put our foot down and really kind of get to the forefront and take control of this series, because that right there is where they have failed in the last 4 years, in particular in this 7-year stretch.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is playday.
All right, let's bring in Ben Goessling right now, Vikings beat writer from the Star Tribune. Going to try to give him some well-deserved time off. I imagine this is a little bit of a less stressful week than the ones leading up to the draft were, Ben, but wanted to bring you on, not just to kind of talk about the draft and the aftermath, because, I think it was an interesting draft, and in kind of reading through the 5 questions post that you did on Monday, that's in Tuesday's paper as well, I figured what they did in the draft was interesting, but left, just by looking at what you wrote, left a lot of the same questions that we went into the draft with unanswered. What happens at quarterback now? They didn't take a Kirk Cousins replacement. What about Za'Darius Smith and Dalvin Cook? They're still on the roster. How do they remake the defense? They didn't do a whole lot of upgrading, at least not with top 100 picks. So I'm hoping to get into all of those things and more. But first off, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm mostly recovered from the weekend. I decided to throw in a 22-mile run the morning of day 3 of the draft too. So, just a light jog before day 3 of the thing. So, but we're doing fine. We're getting back to it here. I
run too, Ben, but I like to have 22-mile weeks, not 22-mile days these days. I just did right before we started talking. I did about 3, and that felt good. But we are getting into the time of year where it's not just work to run; it's actually pleasurable to be outside in these days. So
when the winds are not 35 miles an hour, it helps. But
yes,
we make do. At least it's not snowing.
We tell ourselves lies about what are nice days, but it's decent.
Sure
We're getting into the decent running season, that is for sure.
Yeah.
Let's start with quarterbacks, because there was more than just idle speculation. There was legitimate intrigue about would they take a quarterback in this draft. And I think 2 things set that up. One, how they approached the offseason with Kirk Cousins, where ostensibly he is a free agent after this season. And number 2, there was legitimate, questions about could they move up for somebody like Anthony Richardson. And your own reporting, you mocked him to the Vikings at like 11 or 12, somewhere in that range. Yep. And, your reporting suggested they liked him quite a bit. So there was this possibility that they could draft the successor to Kirk Cousins. They did not. Where does that leave them now at quarterback? Obviously, we know where it leaves them in 2023. Where do you think that leaves them in 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of leaves us in the same place we were in, right? They take Jaron Hall in the 5th round, who they liked from BYU, and we talked about that, I think, a little bit last week as a name to watch, because that was somebody they had talked to before the draft and came away with a good impression of him. But he doesn't come in as the immediate successor or the obvious next guy for Cousins. He'll need some work, and the ceiling being high enough to think that he's going to be that guy, I think that's you can't put that on a 5th round pick who hasn't been in an NFL caliber offense, or at least an NFL style offense, yet. So I don't think they're thinking of it that way, which means they are basically still in the spot they were in. Cousins is a free agent after the year. They, I think, still want to, if they're going to replace him, to have it be somebody that is an upgrade or they think has the potential to be an upgrade. Probably it's going to have to be the potential to be an upgrade with a rookie, but I think they will look for one, one of those quarterbacks they think could be a blue chip guy, can be a franchise type player if they can get one. And they know it's expensive. It's difficult to do it. They liked Anthony Richardson a lot. I really believe that had Richardson slid a little further, they would have made a strong push to go get him. 4 was going to be tough to get to. And you saw what it took to move up to 3 when the Texans came back up and traded with the Cardinals. I mean, you're talking about a lot to give up. And if the Colts were set on him, 3 was the only place you could really get to.
Right.
To get him, because if the Colts were going to take him at 4, you didn't really have an option. The whole quarterback thing would have opened up more if the Texans had not taken CJ Stroud, because then you're sitting there saying, okay, 3, the Cardinals may have gotten a big offer for somebody to come up and get Stroud anyway, but it's a little bit more in play when those 2 guys are still on the board. Or there was some thought that the Colts liked Will Levis enough to possibly take him in the top 10. Obviously, that was not the case. Anthony Richardson turned out was their guy. So it was going to be tough for them to move up that far, especially without a second-round pick. I mean, you're talking about giving up years of first-round picks to do it. And I think if it was 24's first-round pick, yeah, they probably do it. But if you're talking 24 and 25 and maybe something else in there, that would have been, I think, quite a bit to do. So it leaves you in this same spot where I think it's possible that Cousins returns in 24. And I know everybody is, well, there's 2 camps. There's one that's clapping and there's one that's groaning. That tends to be how things work with Kirk Cousins. I got some emails this morning saying that all you reporters are nothing but negative on Kirk Cousins. I'm thinking of the reporters that you would say are all of the time negative on Kirk Cousins. I don't know that my track record would suggest I'm the first place to go with that, but whatever, it's fine. This is the debate with Kirk Cousins all the time. Is he good enough? Is he going to be somebody that can take you on a deep run, or do you need to figure out a way to move forward with him or to move forward beyond him, I guess I should say. I think they have their eyes fairly open about that. I think they know they have a good starter at that position in a spot where not a lot of teams do. So if they could get him signed, if he has another strong year this year, and they can figure out a contract that works for both sides in terms of how the guaranteed money shakes out, I don't think that's out of the question. If they don't do it, I think you either look at them trying to make a big move up next year to take a swing at Caleb Williams or Drake May, the top 2 quarterbacks in next year's draft, at least as we sit right now. Or you say, let's get a bridge starter for the time being, and then you keep coming back to try to find that guy in the draft to be the long-term option. I don't think they want to do something where it's let's sit with a 15, 16, 17 ranked starter in the league for the next 10 years. I don't think they think Cousins is that. And some people would say he is. I don't think they view him that way. I think they probably would put him, probably where I think a lot of us would, probably 8 to 10, something like that. So I think that's a good thing to have. I mean, certainly to have a guy that's durable, a guy that's accurate, a guy that can command your offense, a guy that's been a lot better at the end of games. That is a valuable commodity. I don't think they want to come off of that for just anybody. So that puts us where we were. It makes it expensive to execute the solution that I think they want to try to do. But I also think they are not trying to patch this together with just anybody. I think if they're going to move off of Cousins, they want it to be somebody they believe can be the answer at that position for a long time.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And part of the reason we're having this conversation so intensely this year, and, I think past debates about Cousins have maybe been a little bit more one-sided on the wishful thinking of those of us who thought this Cousins just isn't the guy. He's good, but not great. But the Vikings felt differently about him, that he was their guy. The reason this conversation changed this year is because of the way they approached their negotiations with him and just didn't extend him. The fact that they put at least a potential end date, an expiration date on this beyond, at the end of this season made this conversation a lot more relevant this season.
Yeah, they kicked open this question in a way that they have not. I mean, let's be very clear about that. They have repeatedly come back and said, no, he's our guy, at least for the next couple of years. They opened this question up by the way they handled the contract. So we have to talk about it.
Yes. And to your point, it wasn't just going to be anybody. Will Levis was there at 23. Hendon Hooker was there at 23. Hooker's still there at 68 when Detroit ends up taking him. I think that was the slot he got picked in the early in the third round. Levis doesn't go till early in the second round. Like if they liked either of those guys enough, they had the capital, or they could have just done it right there at 23. So to your point, if they didn't think those were the guys, they weren't just going to make a change at quarterback or draft a quote unquote quarterback of the future if they didn't believe in that person, at least at that draft slot.
Yeah, and here's how they viewed a lot of the quarterbacks in this group. It was not that, we think these guys are going to be terrible quarterbacks.
Yes.
They knew that if you take one at 23, the expectation becomes this is your starter in 2024. They did not believe that Will Levis or Hendon Hooker, at least at this point, were going to be up to that task where you come in and there's every eye on you from the day that you step in the building through every rep you take in training camp. They would have had myself and everybody else sitting there charting every pass in training camp, probably almost to excess, because I tend to think that stuff is probably not really worth as much as it gets made to be. But you would have had that happen. So that rookie would have been under the microscope knowing that there is an expiration date with Cousins. So they did not view Levis or Hooker as being ready to step in and do that in 2024. So part of it was they weren't going to take a quarterback in that spot, knowing that comes with it. When you take a quarterback in the first round, there is an expectation that comes with it. There's messaging that comes with that player that I think they just didn't want to put on guys they didn't feel were going to be ready to handle it.
Now, I got a specific question, and then first a more general question, though, because the player they do take is Jordan Addison, wide receiver from USC. Not a guy with a lot of size, but a guy that can play on the outside or on the inside in the slot, can get open, kind of, they say, plays faster than his, foot speed. I think his combine time was 4.49. So they add somebody to the offense who they feel like can help, certainly in a general sense. How does Jordan Addison complement what they want to do on offense?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a question that Kevin O'Connell has talked about and has asked himself a lot. And that question is, when teams do what they do against Justin Jefferson, where they sell out and say, we're going to devote a lot of resources to just making sure this guy doesn't beat us, you have to have ways to punish teams for doing that. And that was why they got TJ Hawkinson. That was what motivated this pick. You need other people that they feel like are dangerous enough to draw coverage away from Justin Jefferson, or effective enough to benefit from and exploit the one-on-one matchups you're going to get if people try to take Jefferson away. So Addison comes in as a guy, I think, that can play all three spots. O'Connell talked about that. They're going to train him in every spot, knowing that they're going to move Jefferson around, so they want to have other receivers they can do the same thing with. He can get downfield. He's not the biggest guy in the world, so he's going to get pressed. He's going to have to figure out how to beat press coverage, because I'm sure people are going to try to be physical with him to disrupt timing. But he's been a guy that can separate with a variety of route running moves. He's a guy that I think can stop and start quickly enough that you create a lot of separation that way. It's the kind of the sharp breaks, the things that we saw Stephon Diggs do so well.
Yeah, so that's kind of the comp. I'm feeling in my head right now.
Yep. I think that's true. And Diggs turned into more of a deep threat over his time in Minnesota. But the thing he probably did the best is, Mike Zimmer used to talk about this all the time, that he would be able to make cuts without sacrificing much speed. So when he would make breaks and the defensive back has to react to it, and all of a sudden he can't slow down as quickly as Diggs can, or stop and start again as quickly as Diggs can, you can create several yards of separation just by knowing where you're going when the other guy doesn't, and being quicker in and out of it than the other guy can be. So you don't have to be the best deep threat in the world or be the biggest guy in the world if you're able to do that. And there's not really a combine test that measures that. I mean, I suppose a 10-yard shuttle in some ways, but we don't really have a great metric for, there's a guy covering you, how much separation can you get on him within a couple of seconds, or within, the top of a route, where you might break one way and he thinks you're going another way. I think there's a lot of that he brings to it that is just really hard to quantify unless you're watching the tape and you see it in games. So he's going to be a guy, I think, that brings some of that to the offense. And I think they hope can be, probably a little bit of at least an intermediate target for Kirk Cousins that can do some things after the catch when he gets the ball as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because that brings me to kind of the more specific thing. You go back to the playoff game, and a lot of things went wrong in the playoff game. There's a lot of things they could have addressed in the draft that would have been directly related to the playoff game. You think about the defense, you draft a corner, maybe that helps you, in a situation where you gave up, 31 points, more than 400 yards. The defense was certainly a problem last season. You could have gone, offensive line, defensive line, a lot of different places you could go to help your team, but you go wide receiver. And to me, you go to, fair or not, you will always, with that playoff game, you will return to the 4th and 8 play, where I think, Kirk Cousins gets probably more of the blame on that play than he deserves, because there were not a lot of great options on that play. I didn't love a lot of the play design. Some of the guys who were running the routes weren't open. The protection was bad. Like he I don't know if he made the best of a bad situation, but it was a bad situation that he was put in. And, I thought part of the reason I was fascinated by this draft was I thought back to that play and thought about how a more mobile quarterback maybe makes something out of nothing there, whether it's escaping the pocket and giving yourself more time to throw, or actually just using your feet and trying to run for a first down in that situation. So part of that was intrigue over someone like Anthony Richardson, who could become a quarterback like that. Short of that, someone like Jordan Addison, I plug him into that play, and I've watched it again like 5 or 6 times, just like I did when it happened. I watched it 5 or 6 times on Monday before we started talking, thinking about how he could run a route out of the slot or wherever he is, how useful someone like him would have been on that play where he's facing pressure, where Hawkinson, I don't know what exactly he was supposed to be doing there, but that wasn't happening much.
Osborne, it was an out route after chipping, which was they had him chip first.
And he wasn't supposed to be a receiver in that play really at all, right? Like
certainly wasn't the number 1 option.
He wasn't even like the number 2 or number 3 option on that play, and which is weird to begin with, because he's probably your second best target. But I digress. A lot of things were wrong with that play. Jefferson's double covered. Thielen's not open. Osborne's not open. You can maybe make a case that you throw to Osborne, maybe make a case that you throw to Jefferson in double coverage, but someone like Addison, and not to put so much on him, but someone like Addison, doesn't even have to be a 4th and 8, but it was a 4th and 8 in this case. I don't think they had a lot of great 10 or 12-yard plays in their offense last year. I think they had a lot of good 15 to 20-yard plays. I think they had a lot of good 6 to 8-yard plays. I don't know, but the intermediate route that you're just talking about right there, something that he could do well. I just kept thinking how useful he could be on a play like that and on a situation like that, and I wondered if that play sticks in O'Connell's head in the same way it sticks in my head.
Yeah, I don't know if it does or not. I mean, I think it was interesting. He did bring up, he's a guy that could maybe turn 8 yards into you throw him a pass for 8 yards and he goes for 16, and everybody kind of said, well, did he pick 8 just arbitrarily, or was there something behind that? Like,
I didn't even hear that quote. I love it though. That's great. Okay.
I don't think that was like a subtle message that he picked the number 8 there. Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't assume that.
I wouldn't. It's fun to think he did. Well, it's fun to think that he did.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't know if he did or if he didn't. I'm gonna lean on the side of saying it was just a offhanded thing, yes. and it probably just happened to be coincidentally the same number that they needed on that last play.
Yes.
But the point remains, he does bring that element to the offense where he can run after the catch. He's a guy that can get open underneath, and they hope can turn into somebody that is a valuable threat in the offense, so that if you do have that situation where people are double teaming Justin Jefferson, you need somebody that can get open quickly.
Yes.
In the press coverage part, can he beat that? I think that's going to be the big question that answers whether he can get open quickly in some of those spots. But if he can, he becomes a target maybe underneath, and then has enough, twitchability or twitchiness, to use the scout jargon terms that you hear all the time over the draft over the weekend. Maybe he has got enough of that he can make a play, get you a first down, and then you keep going. Because the thing is, you still have a quarterback in Cousins, for better or worse, that is not going to force the ball an awful lot. And we saw him do more of that, where he was making tougher throws into double coverage. Justin Jefferson certainly encouraged him to do that, but his default status is not gunslinger guy. He's not going to go out and be, Brett Favre or somebody that Patrick Mahomes has some of this to his game, and Patrick Mahomes does a lot of things that most people on this planet just can't pull off. So you get away with that. But Cousins is not that guy, and he's probably in that situation not going to be that guy where it's just okay, fine, Justin, go get it. And certainly that happened in Buffalo on the 4th and 18, and I think there was probably some instruction there. Hey, trust Justin, give him a chance, and I think they'll probably try to keep nudging him in that direction, but he's not going to make that choice all of the time on his own. There is a high priority on taking care of the ball. There's a high priority on making smart decisions with it. And in that spot, when it's got to have it, it is tough to get him out of that space. And you almost have to operate in a different mindset completely than he does most of the time, which is really hard to do. I think just human nature, it's hard to do that. Right. So if you have somebody that, okay, knowing how Kirk plays, knowing what his typical mode of operation is, if we can find a guy that works within that helps us be better within that, that's probably a good thing for everybody.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that makes me think that they could be a better third down team this year, because they're not always going to be kind of those 4th and 8 do or dies, but 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, those are important downs. Those are the downs you got to win in games to keep drives going, and they did an okay job of that, especially in the biggest moments of the games last year. But they had a lot of times where drives just stalled, where if you take away Jefferson, the whole thing kind of falls apart. So maybe that does help solidify what was already a good offense and take it to another level. On the other hand, they have not done much with the defense. I know they addressed it with a lot of the other later picks in the draft and somewhat in free agency with Byron Murphy, with Marcus Davenport, but it's looking like this will be a Brian Flores go coach him up kind of thing, and I'm just still wondering what the plan is there to a certain degree, and how much they are kind of banking on the development, especially in the secondary.
Yeah, I think that has to be a lot of it, because they didn't have a lot of money to spend, and they only had one pick in the first 2 rounds, and they ended up with only one pick in the top 100 once they traded back. I mean, that 100 is an arbitrary distinction, so it's maybe not that big of a deal. But this was not one of the years where they're sitting there with 4 or 5, and they're not the Lions or the Packers where they had all of these choices in the first 2-3 rounds of the draft. So getting premium talent at the cornerback position is always difficult. It's going to be even more difficult when you can't pay for it, and you don't have that many picks at the top of the draft, and you have a lot of needs in other places. So yes, it is going to be a year where you count on Andrew Booth to get better. You count on Caleb Evans to get better. You hope that Mekhi Blackman comes in and can be a contributor. Byron Murphy needs to probably be cornerback number 1 in a lot of cases. Jawan Williams, who they added from the former Patriot that they signed on kind of a flyer deal, is going to be a big part of it as well. But you could make a case that the most significant addition they made to the defense is the coordinator, in the sense of, if you look at who has the most equity built up in the NFL in terms of a track record of this person has been successful at what they do, it's probably Brian Flores. So there's certainly let's bank on him being able to scheme up something that works for our group, and him being able to develop a lot of the players that we have, because there's no doubt there was frustration last year with Ed Donatel and the scheme not really working for what they wanted. I mean, Kevin O'Connell made enough veiled kind of hints at that towards the end of the season that it wasn't hard to figure out. And obviously the move he makes is to go almost a completely opposite direction in terms of the philosophy. So does it work? Do you have guys that can play man coverage? We don't know, because you haven't seen them do it in the NFL. They have the body types that you would think, yes, but it will take some time. It will take a lot of work to develop into that. But they didn't have a lot of great options to do anything else. And I think certainly the bet is on Flores being able to get more out of this group and help some of these players who were, a second-round pick in the case of Andrew Booth, a first-round pick in the case of Lewis Cine, try to develop these guys into something where all of a sudden they do become cornerstone type players on your defense. It's just that you don't start the year thinking of them that way because you haven't seen them do it yet.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What doesn't necessarily make sense, a couple more things for you, Ben, before we let you go. What doesn't necessarily make sense is it's May now. The draft has come and gone. Dalvin Cook and Za'Darius Smith are still here.
Yes.
Are we inching towards the possibility that they're just going to ride with these two guys, or do you feel like something is still likely to happen with one or both of them before we get to training camp even?
Yeah, I think something, I don't know if training camp will be it. I could see something even, before the start of the season. It may be a situation where if somebody has an injury that, hey, we all of a sudden need an edge rusher or we need a running back, maybe it becomes that kind of a discussion. The tricky thing here with these guys that I think was going to make it difficult to get anything done over the weekend is that you probably have to adjust the contract of either player. In the case of Za'Darius Smith, it's that he wants more money. In the case of Dalvin Cook, it's that he has the fourth highest cap hit in the league for a running back at $14.1 million. It doesn't make sense for the Vikings to carry him at that number. I don't think they want to give either player away, though, which is why I think this has played out as long as it has. I don't think it necessarily means that they're both here. I don't think it necessarily means that we've heard the last of this. I think if they're here, the contracts get adjusted. I really think that, especially Cook, if he's going to be here, the team probably doesn't look at that deal at this point as being a great play for them. The reason he's still here is he had that guarantee kick in, and you're not just going to give him away. So yeah. I think they would be open to restructuring the contract, certainly, and bringing him back on that capacity. But does he want that? Is he going to agree to that? That's a question there. Za'Darius Smith, the Vikings are happy with the price. I mean, you'd like to have more cap space, but it's a friendly deal for the team in terms of what he's getting paid based on the production. He wants more money, though, and he has been fairly vocal about that on Instagram, kind of wishing his goodbye to Minnesota, and then the leak comes out seconds later that he wants a new contract. That's not an accident. You can figure out where that stuff comes from. There's not much mystery in terms of what he wants, and there's not much mystery in terms of what the Vikings seem to want with Dalvin Cook especially. So how all of that gets done is, I think, worth watching. I would point out this too, that both of these players are signed for this year. Both of these players have guaranteed money, and yet Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah says over the weekend, we continue to be in communication with them to try to work out solutions. What solutions are there to work out if we're just going to keep everything as is? They're under the cap by a couple of $1 million. These guys are on the roster. You could sit here and say, hey, there's nothing to do. They're on the roster. End of story. The fact that he continues to say we're working towards solutions tells you a lot.
Yes.
And that this is not done.
No. They didn't take an offensive lineman. Let's end there. For the first time in, I think you wrote, since 2017, they didn't pick one in the top 2 rounds.
I think I had 3 thresholds in there for you. I tripled down to get you going.
You did. I read it. I read every word of especially of offensive line coverage. They haven't done anything really meaningful at all to upgrade the offensive line this offseason. I guess you could consider at least the tackles a position of strength, but you do have O'Neal coming off the injury. This is either a signal that they feel pretty good about it, or they just can't do much about anything else, or maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. The fact that Garrett Bradbury is back is, I wondered how that would go. I wondered if they would try to get something done with him or not, but I think they looked at their options and said, this is still a better spot than we could be otherwise, given the fact that it's expensive to add players or having a rookie come in, especially when you didn't have very many picks and you're probably not going to take one at 23. That would have been a hard spot to be too. Now, Garrett Bradbury's deal, basically they can get out of it after a year. Ezra Cleveland is a free agent after the year. Ed Ingram needs to be a lot better in year 2 than he was in year 1. So there are a lot of things to figure out in the middle of that group, especially. They didn't do anything to add to it. So I think it's the first time since, I think it was 2007.
That they didn't draft one at all.
One at all. And the first time since 16 that they haven't taken one in the top 3 rounds. First time since 17 they haven't done it in the top 2. So they've invested a lot to try to fix a spot that had been an issue for a really long time for them. And they didn't do that this year, I think in part just because they didn't have a lot of resources to do. I mean, you just didn't have enough ways to get to everything on the grocery list this year. There just wasn't enough options to go do that. So I think that's part of it. You're gambling a little bit there with Garrett Bradbury coming back and hoping that he's better, hoping that Ed Ingram gets better, and then maybe that makes Bradbury's life a little bit easier. You're hoping Brian O'Neill is healthy by training camp. They've said that they think he will be, but we won't really know that until he goes out there and does it. You hope Christian Darrisaw continues to develop into one of the best tackles in the league. It certainly seems like that may be the best bet they have, and they probably need a little bit more from Ezra Cleveland as well. So there are a lot of questions there. I think it's the same questions we had at the end of the season, simply because they weren't able to do a lot. The thing I will say that I feel like they do have going for them is there are some depth options. They're not completely devoid of solid backups that they could trust if they needed to make an adjustment there. Chris Reed is a guy that's played a long time in the NFL. Blake Brandel, I think, has shown that he is a capable NFL offensive lineman, and they like Vidarian Lowe, the second-year guy, quite a bit as well. So there could be some competition, especially if Ingram is a trouble spot, or maybe if you clear up some cap space with Smith or Cook, you can go get somebody. Those cut down day moves have served them well in the past, whether it's been a guy like Jeremiah Searles, or they had one other one, Mike Harris, I think the year before that.
Okay.
That guys you get that are somebody else's cut, and he can come in and be at least a serviceable starter, a guy that can come in and play and contribute. I mean, heck, a guy like Joe Berger, we've talked about a million times in this podcast, but those guys are super valuable because they make $1 million or $2 million a year. They come in, they play well, they take care of their stuff, and you don't realize how valuable those guys are until they're gone. And if they find a guy like that, maybe Chris Reed turns into that guy, we'll see. But those types of players are not sexy pickups for anybody. But if you make one, sometimes you look back at the end of seasons and say, man, I think of that was 2017. Like, they got so much out of Joe Berger that season in a spot where they needed it really, really badly, that was one of the keys to, at least in my mind, of that whole thing coming together as well as it did, because they needed a guy to come in there and step in and play well. I think he played just about every snap and was able to play in a number of different spots. So those types of low-level pickups that don't make a ton of headlines, sometimes you look back on it, man, that was one of the better things they did. So it's not out of the question they do that at some point here too. But as of right now, it's mostly roll with what you have and hope that some of the players you have on the roster get a little bit better than they were last year.
Any chance they could go back to the UP and get Joe Berger back for one more go?
So this has been like 7 years, I suppose now, 6 seasons, I guess, since the last one he played. I think he has done what a lot of linemen do and lose a bunch of weight. I think he's down to like 220, 230, maybe that. I think he's happily retired, family man that's, I think, fixing up cars. He's got an impressive, like an old Studebaker, and he had an engineering degree from Michigan Tech, so super smart guy.
Yeah.
I think he's happy to be at home playing with cars and raising his family and kind of staying out of the public spotlight. So I don't think that one's happening. But if you can find someone of the Joe Berger ilk,
yes, I
think you're always better for it.
Okay. All right. Well, Ben, I appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank Mike.
Always love catching up with Ben Goessling. We do it a lot on Access Vikings. But in this particular case, I just think there's a lot of interesting, lingering questions after the draft. Ben did a great job breaking down kind of what comes next, why the Vikings are in the spot they're in right now after the draft, and what they might do still to shape this roster going into 2023. And later on today on the Randball blog, I will take a shot at kind of explaining the Jordan Addison pick within the context of that 4th and 8 play that ended the Vikings season last year. Where might he have helped, as Ben and I talked about during our segment? Where might he have helped? How specifically can someone like him help on a 3rd and long, a 4th and long, especially one where the season is on the line? Let's finish with the cooler. Chris Hine took a swing at a Karl-Anthony Towns kind of trade pros and cons. Not a real swing. He's not Kyle Anderson with Rudy Gobert, but a kind of metaphorical swing at what a Karl-Anthony Towns trade would look like, why salary-wise it might make some sense, why action-wise it might not make sense, continuity-wise, things like that. Go give that a read. Star Tribune, startribune.com. It's a lot of the stuff that we've kind of talked about, especially with Chris on last week's show, but it's nice to see it kind of all laid out in kind of a format that you can easily digest and think about. It's the biggest offseason question for the Wolves. What do they do with Karl-Anthony Towns, and why might they do it? That will do it for me here today. Good stuff coming up on the rest of the week. Hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.